Medieval poison rings that killed kings in silence. A king sits at his banquet table. Roasted swan, honeyed wine, musicians playing soft melodies in the corner. Courtiers laugh. Candles flicker against stone walls 5 feet thick. He's surrounded by guards, by family, by advisors who've served 3 generations. He is protected. He is powerful. He is safe. And he is already dead. The woman who kissed his hand wore a ring. Gold, ornate, set with a single ruby that caught the light just so. Beautiful. Expensive. Unremarkable. Her fingers brushed his wrist as she curtsied, a gesture of respect. A moment so brief no one noticed. No one except the king, who felt nothing, just the cool touch of metal against skin. By evening, his throat burns. By midnight, he's convulsing. By dawn, he's a corpse wrapped in silk. And the physicians are blaming bad humors, tainted meat, God's will. Never the ring. Never the woman who's already 3 towns away, the ruby hollow now, the poison delivered. This is how kings died in silence. Not on battlefields with swords raised and banners flying. Not in duels where honor could be claimed and witnesses could testify. They died at feasts, in bedchambers, during mass. They died because someone wore jewelry, because someone shook a hand, because someone leaned close and whispered treason disguised as counsel. Poison rings. Small enough to hide in plain sight. Deadly enough to end dynasties. They were weapons forged not in blacksmiths' fires, but in jewelers' workshops, crafted by artisans who understood that the most dangerous blade is the one no one sees coming. Before we continue, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Today, I'm covering 11 poison rings that killed kings, nobles, rivals, and threats. Not legends, not myths whispered in taverns. Real rings. Real poisons. Real bodies buried with lies carved into their tombs. We know their mechanisms. We know their victims. We know the silence they left behind. This isn't a story about power. It's a story about how power dies. Slowly, invisibly, in rooms where no one screams, because no one realizes murder is happening until it's already done. Some of these rings delivered poison through hidden compartments. Others had needles so fine they felt like nothing more than the press of metal. A few required nothing but proximity. Powder released into wine cups, onto bread, into the air itself. Each one was designed with a single purpose: to kill without evidence, without witness, without the killer ever needing to draw a blade. The irony is that kings wore rings themselves. Signet rings pressed into wax seals that authenticated decrees, that declared wars, that ordered executions. Rings were symbols of authority. So when death came from a ring, it came wearing the costume of legitimacy. It looked like jewelry. It felt like ceremony. It was murder dressed as etiquette. Let's begin with the deadliest. Ring 1, the Borgia hollow. The Borgia family didn't invent poison, but they perfected its delivery. Cesare Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI, allegedly wore a ring designed by the finest goldsmiths in Rome. Gold band, wide and heavy, set with an emerald that opened on a hidden hinge. Inside, a compartment no larger than a peppercorn, lined with wax to keep the powder dry. The poison was cantarella, a Borgia specialty. Arsenic mixed with phosphorus and possibly the viscera of pigs fed on arsenic-laced grain. The symptoms mimicked cholera, stomach illness, fever. Perfect for a world where disease killed as often as violence. Cesare would clasp a rival's hand in friendship. The pressure of the handshake triggered a tiny spring. The compartment opened just enough. Powder transferred to the victim's palm. Later, hours, sometimes a full day, the victim would eat bread, wipe sweat from his brow, touch his lips. The poison entered through mucous membranes, through small cuts, through the simple act of living. 3 days later, fever. 5 days, convulsions. 7 days, death. And Cesare would attend the funeral, grief-stricken, the emerald ring glinting in candlelight as he crossed himself and prayed for the soul of the man he'd murdered. The ring was never just a container. It was a performance. A ritual of trust turned into assassination. The victim died believing in friendship, in alliance, in the safety of a handshake that had been honored for generations. Ring 2. The Venetian Needle. Venice, 1520s. A city built on water and secrets, where the Council of Ten ruled through spies and hired killers. The poison ring favored by Venetian assassins wasn't hollow. It was sharp. The design was simple. A gold ring with a large decorative bezel, Lion of St. Mark, cross, merchant symbol, and beneath it a needle no thicker than a hair, spring-loaded and retractable. The needle was coated in a paste made from aconite, also called wolfsbane or monkshood, one of the fastest-acting plant poisons known to medieval and Renaissance Europe. Aconite stops the heart. It disrupts electrical signals in cardiac muscle. Victims feel numbness spreading from the point of contact. Then, difficulty breathing. Then, arrhythmia. Death can occur within hours, sometimes minutes if the dose is concentrated. The assassin would approach in a crowd, at a festival, in a church, during carnival when masks hid faces and chaos provided cover. A hand on a shoulder. A steadying touch during a stumble. A brush of fingers in passing. The needle deployed, retracted, hidden again in less than a second. The victim felt a sting like an insect bite. Nothing alarming. Nothing worth investigating. By evening, he's gasping for air. By midnight, his heart has stopped. Physicians find no wound, no evidence of violence, just a small red mark on his shoulder that could be anything. A flea bite, a scratch, God's judgment. The Venetian needle rings were commissioned by wealthy merchants eliminating rivals, by nobles settling inheritance disputes, by the council itself when political threats needed erasing without scandal. The ring turned every crowd into a potential execution chamber, every touch into a possible death sentence. Ring 3. The Medici Compartment. Florence. The Medici family, bankers and patrons of arts, also understood that beauty conceals danger. Catherine de' Medici, later Queen of France, allegedly possessed multiple poison rings crafted by Italian masters. One of the most notorious featured a hinged bezel that opened to reveal a small cavity. But this ring was designed differently. It didn't deliver poison through touch or needle. It delivered through proximity to food and drink. Catherine would wear the ring to banquets, her hand resting near a wine cup, near a plate of delicacies. A casual gesture, adjusting her sleeve, reaching for bread, and the compartment opened. A pinch of powder fell into wine. White arsenic, tasteless and odorless, dissolved instantly. Or sometimes a more exotic poison, distilled venom from toads bred in the Medici laboratories, carefully dried and ground into powder so fine it floated on liquid surfaces. The victim drank, complimented the wine, continued eating. By the time symptoms appeared, hours later, sometimes the next day, Catherine was elsewhere, the ring sealed shut, evidence non-existent. What made this ring particularly insidious was its dual purpose. The compartment also held antidotes. If Catherine herself accidentally consumed poisoned food, a constant fear in Renaissance courts, she could open the ring and swallow the counteragent. Theriac, a complex mixture of dozens of ingredients including viper flesh, said to neutralize most poisons. Whether it actually worked is debatable. But the psychology was brilliant. The same ring that delivered death could theoretically prevent it. These three rings, hollow compartment, hidden needle, proximity delivery, represent the fundamental designs that would be replicated, refined, and deployed across European courts for centuries. They transformed jewelry into weaponry, ornament into execution device, and they taught a brutal lesson. In the world of kings and nobles, trust itself could kill you. Ring 4. The death of Duke Alessandro. Florence, 1537. Duke Alessandro de' Medici, called Il Moro for his dark complexion, ruler of Florence, cousin to popes, wielded absolute power. He was also hated, a tyrant who'd crushed Republican resistance and ruled through fear and Spanish backing. Lorenzino de' Medici, called Lorenzaccio, was Alessandro's distant cousin and supposed companion. He wore a signet ring, silver with the Medici coat of arms. Unremarkable, except the underside of the bezel concealed a hollow spine coated in a paste made from crushed deathcap mushrooms mixed with quicklime to preserve potency. Lorenzino arranged a meeting, promising Alessandro a secret encounter with a noblewoman. They met in a private chamber. Conversation. Wine. Lorenzino clasped Alessandro's hand in what seemed like brotherly affection. The spine pierced skin on the Duke's palm. A sharp pain, quickly dismissed. Alessandro began feeling ill within the hour. Severe abdominal pain. Vomiting. But he didn't connect these symptoms to the handshake, to the ring, to his trusted cousin. By the time Lorenzino struck with an actual dagger, the poison having weakened Alessandro too much to fight back, the Duke was already dying. The mushroom toxins were destroying his liver, cell by cell. Lorenzino fled Florence. He was celebrated by some as a tyrannicide, condemned by others as a traitor. He wrote a treatise justifying the assassination, but never once mentioned the ring, never revealed that the dagger was theatrical. The real murder weapon had been the silver signet with its concealed spine, delivered hours before the blade. Alessandro's physicians noted the abdominal symptoms, but attributed them to sudden illness. The small puncture wound on his palm was never connected to his death. History recorded a stabbing. The ring remained invisible. Ring 5. The Banquet of King Henry. This case is murkier, evidence circumstantial, but compelling enough that historians still debate it. Henry, a king whose identity is obscured by conflicting medieval chronicles, possibly a minor German or Bohemian ruler, died at a feast in 1420s. The feast was elaborate. 7 courses. Minstrels. A visiting dignitary from a rival court attended, wearing a large episcopal ring, gold with a purple amethyst. During the feast, this dignitary sat beside the king. They drank from shared cups, a gesture of peace. They tore bread from the same loaf, another symbol of unity. But witnesses later recalled the dignitary's strange movements. His hand hovering over the king's cup, a gesture that seemed like blessing but wasn't accompanied by prayer. The large amethyst ring positioned directly above the wine for just a moment. Some poison rings operated not through hidden compartments, but through porous stones. Amethyst, in particular, could be treated, hollowed slightly, filled with poison, then sealed with colored wax that matched the stone. When pressed in the right way, the wax seal broke, and liquid poison dripped out. The king drank. Within an hour, he was clutching his stomach. By evening, bloody diarrhea. By the next day, fever and delirium. He died 3 days later. Physicians blamed contaminated food. The dignitary had already departed, offering condolences through messengers. The amethyst ring was described in letters from the period, mentioned because of its size and beauty. Whether it was a poison ring remains unproven. But the timing, the symptoms, the convenient departure, these align too perfectly with deliberate poisoning to be mere coincidence. Ring 6, the papal poison, Rome, 1503. Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, died suddenly during a banquet. So did his son Cesare, though Cesare survived, permanently damaged. The official cause? Malaria. The whispered truth? Poison, possibly intended for a cardinal who'd become inconvenient. Multiple accounts suggest Cesare wore his emerald poison ring to the banquet, intending to eliminate a rival. But in the chaos of the feast, servants pouring wine, cups moved and replaced, Cesare and his father accidentally drank from poisoned cups meant for someone else. Other accounts claim the poisoning was deliberate, orchestrated by enemies who'd learned about Cesare's ring and turned his own method against him. They commissioned a duplicate ring, bribed a servant to swap them, filled the duplicate's compartment with a more lethal dose. Alexander died writhing in agony, vomiting black bile, his body swelling grotesquely. Cesare survived but was bedridden for weeks, his health never fully recovering. The emerald ring disappeared from historical record after this incident. Whether Cesare destroyed it, lost it, or died still wearing it is unknown. What's certain is the irony: the Borgias, who'd wielded poison rings as instruments of power, were potentially undone by the very weapon they'd perfected. The ring that had killed rivals, silenced critics, and eliminated obstacles became the instrument of their own destruction. These assassinations share a pattern. Proximity, trust, the ritual of shared space, handshakes, banquets, diplomatic meetings. Poison rings turned every gesture of peace into potential murder. They made the social fabric of medieval and Renaissance courts into a minefield where hospitality itself could kill. Ring 7. Lucrezia's defense. Lucrezia Borgia wore poison rings. History has painted her as either victim or monster, but the truth is more complex. In a world where women held power through marriage and childbearing, where political value was tied to virginity and fertility, where threats came from every direction, a poison ring wasn't just a weapon. It was survival. One ring attributed to Lucrezia was delicate, almost feminine in its construction. Thin gold band, small ruby, easily overlooked. But the ruby was hollow, accessible through a tiny hinge disguised as a decorative setting. Inside, a reservoir of poison and, just as importantly, a separate compartment containing an abortifacient. Medieval and Renaissance noblewomen faced constant threats of sexual violence, political marriage to enemies, forced pregnancies that served dynasties but destroyed the women carrying them. A ring like this offered agency in a world designed to deny it. The poison was swift-acting, likely a concentrated plant extract, possibly hemlock or henbane, something that could be deployed if a woman found herself in immediate physical danger. The abortifacient was slower, pennyroyal or tansy oil, substances we discussed in the previous story, which could terminate unwanted pregnancies but at terrible risk. There's no confirmed record of Lucrezia using this ring to kill anyone, but the fact that she wore it, that such rings existed specifically for women in her position, reveals the perpetual state of siege noblewomen endured. Every marriage was potentially a death sentence. Every pregnancy could mean dying in childbirth. Every political alliance made a woman a target. Lucrezia's ring wasn't about power in the traditional sense. It was about having one choice, one moment of control, in a life where almost everything was decided by fathers, husbands, popes, kings. The ruby that caught light at banquets held both death and the prevention of unwanted life. It was beautiful and terrible, like Lucrezia herself, trapped in a story written by men, but trying desperately to write her own ending. Ring 8. The Duchess of Burgundy. Burgundy, 1470s. A duchess, her name lost to protective obscurity, recorded only in fragments of court documents, was married to a duke 30 years her senior. Violent, politically powerful. She was 16. She had no allies, no escape, no future, except producing heirs and enduring abuse. She commissioned a ring from a jeweler in Bruges. Gold, with an intricate design of vines and flowers wrapping around the band. Hidden among the decorative elements, a tiny needle, coated in a slow-acting poison derived from foxglove. Digitalis. It causes heart failure, but slowly, gradually mimicking natural decline. The Duchess wore the ring constantly. At night, when her husband forced himself on her, she would touch his chest, his neck, his face. The needle deployed. A scratch so small it was invisible, dismissed as nothing. She did this over months. Small doses. Accumulation. Her husband's health declined gradually. Shortness of breath. Irregular heartbeat. Weakness. Physicians diagnosed a failing heart, common in men his age who'd lived lives of excess. He died 8 months after the wedding. The Duchess, now a wealthy widow, remarried by choice 2 years later to a minor noble who treated her kindly. The ring stayed in her family for 3 generations. Then it vanished, likely destroyed when the political climate shifted and possessing such a thing became too dangerous. But court records note the Duchess's first marriage, the Duke's decline, and a curious detail: he'd complained of small scratches appearing on his skin, seemingly from nowhere, that never quite healed. This is the shadow history. The undocumented murders. The women who used poison rings not for political gain or dynastic power, but for survival, for escape from situations that would otherwise have killed them slowly through violence, childbirth, or despair. These rings weren't symbols of evil. They were tools of desperate agency. And the fact that we barely know these women's names, that their stories survive only in fragments and whispers, tells us everything about how history treats women who refuse to die quietly. Ring 9, the Ottoman Tulip. Constantinople, 1560s. The Ottoman court, where poison was so common it was practically bureaucratic. Sultans maintained official poisoners. Rivalries between sons, between wives, between viziers played out through slow-acting toxins administered over months. One ring from this period featured a band carved to resemble a tulip, a flower sacred in Ottoman culture, symbol of paradise. The petals were separate pieces of gold, cleverly hinged. When pressed in sequence, they opened to reveal a hollow center containing powder made from crushed seeds of the rosary pea, one of the deadliest natural toxins known. A single seed contains enough abrin to kill an adult. Crushed into powder, it becomes nearly undetectable. Symptoms, vomiting, organ failure, appear hours after ingestion and progress rapidly. There's no antidote. Death is agonizing. This ring was allegedly used to eliminate a rival prince during succession disputes. The assassin was a court eunuch, trusted because castration supposedly removed worldly ambitions. He served sherbet, a sweet drink, to the prince, his hand positioned over the cup as he poured. The tulip petals opened. Powder fell like pollen. The prince died 3 days later, his internal organs liquefied by the abrin's assault on cellular function. The eunuch was never suspected. He was tortured along with everyone else in the investigation. His innocence proven by his willingness to endure questioning. The ring was hidden in plain sight, just another piece of court jewelry, its deadly nature invisible to investigators who didn't know the sequence of presses needed to open it. Ring 10, the French court labyrinth. France, early 1600s. Catherine de' Medici's legacy lived on in a court obsessed with poison. King Henry I survived multiple assassination attempts before finally being killed by a knife, stabbed in his carriage, a death almost refreshing in its directness compared to the slow poisonings that had claimed so many before him. But before the knife, there was a ring, a massive thing, gold and enamel, depicting a labyrinth with a minotaur at its center. The ring belonged to a courtier whose name appears in trial records only as D. He was arrested for conspiracy, tortured, and confessed to attempting to poison the king using the labyrinth ring. The mechanism was ingenious. The ring's face was a functional puzzle. Trace the correct path through the labyrinth with a fingertip, and a tiny drawer opened in the band beneath. Inside, poison paste on a small sponge. The courtier would solve the labyrinth while appearing to fidget with his ring, then extend his hand in greeting. The paste transferred on contact. The attempt failed because the king, paranoid after decades of threats, wore gloves constantly, even indoors, even in summer. The paste never touched skin. D was caught because he attempted the same method on a royal advisor who wasn't as cautious. The advisor survived, raised the alarm. D broke under torture and revealed the ring's secret. The labyrinth ring entered the royal collection of intercepted assassination devices, a cabinet of horrors kept as both evidence and warning. It remained there for a century before being lost during the Revolution, when the palace was looted and such artifacts scattered across Europe sold to collectors who often had no idea what they'd purchased. Ring 11, the scholar's last lesson. Our final ring isn't attached to a king or a famous assassination. It's attached to a scholar, a natural philosopher and physician in Bologna's 1620s who created a poison ring as an academic exercise, a demonstration of concealed mechanics and chemical knowledge. He built it as a teaching tool, a gold ring with a rotating bezel containing 12 tiny compartments, each holding a different poison: arsenic, mercury, crushed glass, snake venom, nightshade, hemlock, aconite, others whose names have been lost. Rotate the bezel to the correct position, press the hidden trigger, and that compartment opened. The scholar lectured on antidotes, on symptoms, on the history of toxicology. The ring was his proof that knowledge itself could be deadly, that learning the mechanisms of death was necessary to understanding preservation of life. After his death, the ring was inherited by his daughter, a woman who'd assisted in his research but was forbidden from university because of her sex. She wore the ring. And when the man who'd stolen her father's research, published it under his own name, built a career on plagiarized brilliance, came to her asking for more notes, more formulas, she agreed to help. She poured him wine with her own hands. The ring's bezel rotated. A compartment opened. Powder fell. She knew exactly which poison she'd selected. The one her father had, called the philosopher's justice. Aconite. Fast. Certain. Agonizing. The plagiarist died. She was never suspected, just a helpful daughter, grieving her father, assisting a scholar who'd been so kind to remember the dead man's work. She lived another 40 years, the ring still on her finger, a reminder that knowledge once stolen carries a debt that eventually must be paid. 11 rings. 11 methods. Hundreds of deaths confirmed, suspected, whispered about in documents that survive in archives where dust settles on truth and fiction equally. Poison rings didn't disappear. They evolved. By the 18th century, they'd become curiosities, collector's items, objects of morbid fascination rather than active weapons. But the principle remained. Power concentrated in something small, beautiful, invisible. Death worn on a finger. The paranoia they created never fully faded. Royal courts developed elaborate protocols. Food tasters who ate from every dish before the king. Locked wine cellars guarded by eunuchs who had no heirs to bribe. Gloves worn at all times. The refusal to shake hands becoming a sign not of rudeness, but of wisdom. Kings learned to fear jewelry. Gifts of rings were inspected by experts before being accepted. Touching became dangerous. The social rituals that bound courts together, the handshakes, the shared cups, the ceremonial intimacy of power became minefields. In the end, poison rings reveal a truth about power that remains relevant. The most dangerous threat isn't the enemy with a sword. It's the trusted advisor, the loving spouse, the loyal servant wearing a ring that catches the light just so. It's the moment when beauty and death become indistinguishable, when a gesture of respect delivers murder, when silence becomes the only witness. The kings are dead. Their kingdoms are dust. The rings, most of them, are lost, melted down, buried with their owners, hidden in private collections where their secrets remain sealed. But the lesson survives. In the Game of Thrones, the hand that offers friendship might also deliver death. And the most perfect murder is the one no one realizes happened until centuries later, when historians sift through documents and wonder why so many powerful men died of sudden illness after receiving gifts of jewelry, after shaking hands with allies, after drinking wine poured by trusted companions. The rings were small. The deaths were silent. The legacy is written in the paranoid protocols of power that persist even now. Background checks, security screenings, the controlled distance between leaders and everyone else. 11 rings. Countless dead. And silence. Always silence. The one constant that outlives kingdoms and kings, and the beautiful, terrible weapons worn on fingers that shaped history one invisible death at a time.